dear participants, all those who are watching us online. And as I was told, this event will be recorded, and we, all of us, you as well, will be able to transmit it, to deliver, to share in your outlets where you would be able to do this. So, first of all, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Rasa Juknevičienė. I am a member of European Parliament from Lithuania. It's my first term as member of Parliament. Before, I was 6 terms as member of Lithuanian Parliament and Minister of Defense in our government for one term. And mostly proud that I was able to vote for our independence in 1990. When we first time elected democratically our parliament, and this is the biggest achievement in my life, I think, together with, of course, others. So this event is somehow continuation of something that is very important, happened yesterday, and very personal one, because yesterday here at the European Parliament, we opened an exhibition. By the way, Russian translation, if someone needs translation into Russian, you can find it here. So we opened an exhibition, The Snows of Yesteryear. You can still visit it at Antal Q3 exhibition here, very close to this place. After the event, if you wish, of course. What is about? It tells a story of orphaned children that were rescued from forced Soviet exile and brought back to Lithuania in 1946. As you understand, it's very much related with the situation we are facing today when we speak about the war against Ukraine. By the way, my mother was one of them. This is a story with which many Soviet-occupied nations can relate. The deportations were part of imperial, colonial, if you want, policies of the Soviet Empire. They targeted all nations, but were particularly harsh against ethnic minorities, or not minorities. I would not say that my country, Lithuania, had Lithuanian minority in Lithuania, of course. It's not the right to say so, but on the other hand, in terms of big Russian population, sometimes it looked like when Soviets occupied us. The deportations were a part, of course, and when we are hosting this event, because unfortunately, this is not just history. The Russian Federation of today continues to be a colonial empire. I very often say that this war against Ukraine is also like a colonial war against Ukraine. And long after all other European empires fell and their colonies gained independence, but not Russia. In Russia happened. So yesterday at the exhibition, I already mentioned, many people said that they had never heard about Soviet deportations, at least about children. Not just the Western Europeans, also people from Russia. I met a lot of young people based in Vilnius now who were, when they were informed about what happened in my country, in Lithuania, so they were really shocked because they never ever heard about that. They heard only about liberation of our country, but not about occupation. So, and this is very important to say because forgotten history has resurfaced. It's striking back with the same regimes, totalitarian regimes, which we see today. And Russian regime today is doing everything possible to hide or whitewash its crimes, historical and present. The history is being rewritten according to Stalin's playbook. And that is one of the foundations of the brutal colonial war that Russia is waging against Ukraine. It brings a lot of tragedies because of that, and here we are today. I am happy to welcome all of you to this event that I am hosting together with the Anti-Discrimination Centre Memorial. ADC Memorial is a Brussels-based human rights organization that originated in Saint Petersburg, Russia. Born out of the memorial movements in the late 1980s, they have been working to protect the rights of minorities in Russia. The organization was among the first 3 to be labeled as foreign agents and was forced to liquidate in 2013. Since then, ADC Memorial is working from Brussels. Today, they are marking the 10th anniversary of their organization here. In the panel, we will hear from dedicated human rights defenders from Russia, who represent various ethnic minority groups, and from Ukraine and Central Asia. Those are regions that have been at the forefront of Russia's colonial policies. Before I give the word to the founder of ADC Memorial, Stefania Kulaeva, a few logistical notes. First, the event will take place in 2 languages already mentioned, English and Russian. We have simultaneous interpretation. Those present in the room can find it using the headphones. The event is streamed live and we have people connected remotely. Interpretation is also available for the viewers online. You can select the language in the bottom left corner of your screen. Online viewers can use the chat function to share comments and ask questions. We will read your questions for the panel during the Q&A session. And finally, the event will also be recorded. I already announced this in the very beginning. And we will share the recording on our social media. So now, without any delay, I give the floor to Stefania Kulaeva to present the panel and to share her introductory thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting the event, and many thanks to the speakers, to everybody who came, especially from far away, and to everybody who is interested in this event. It's true that Anti-Discrimination Centre Memorial is 10 years working from here, from Brussels. And in this booklet that we have made on our work, you can see that issues of minority rights have always been our priority. Here are like small introductory notes on our reports dedicated to, for example, Crimean Tatars, to minorities of Central Asia, Roma in Europe, indigenous peoples of Siberia and Far East, and minorities in Central Asia. And now opposing Russian colonial oppression sounds like an actual and even trendy issue, but it has not always been like that. For a long time, minority rights were not priority for most of our colleagues. And I realized it really when in March 22, one colleague and friend told me, "Now I finally understand why you've been always busy with minorities' rights. Only now I understand that this issue of attitude of a big brother to all the other people surrounding Russia had been the biggest challenge, the biggest problem and danger. Before we didn't see it." I was first surprised because I thought it's strange that this terrific war against Ukraine, and not the beginning of it actually, but the dramatic phase of 2022, because of course beginning was 2014 and it was already very dramatic, but only 2022 opened the eyes of many people, even in an understanding of this importance of voices of different peoples, of equality and non-discrimination. But quickly I understood that actually it is not only different, but it's quite common. Many people started to talk about colonial policies. Many people started to speak about decolonization. There are more and more discussion. There are more and more voices and projects related to this issue. Probably it's true that a war against Ukraine so much opened the eyes and helped some people to understand what's going on. What I think is that voices of different peoples matter, and I'm very happy that we can really give the chance to at least some of these voices to sound here and to join together in opposing Russian colonial oppression and discrimination. For us, as a human rights organization, as anti-discrimination organization and experts, most important is that this oppression has always been based on discrimination and minority rights, human rights violations. Understand it also has a political aspect, it has a historical aspect, and it has even aspect of talking about future. That's, I think, what people mostly are interested in, to discuss how things can go, how politics will develop, how the independence can be obtained. However, I still stay on this idea we should prioritize human rights and anti-discrimination, and if human rights are not violated, and if discrimination is opposed and effectively opposed, then other rights and other political rights and perspectives will come up, all right. But our duty is to stay on this position and to call for not discrimination and also looking on effective ways to oppose discrimination, oppose colonial oppression, and find the best practices among that. Of course, people are in very different situations. Some are very big groups and even countries. Some are very small groups and don't have states. But discrimination is equally a problem, and opposing it is equally necessary. Just to follow up shortly on your idea of children deportations, and again, historical aspect of it comes as big discussion of our days with Ukrainian children. I want to say that with our work, we are also working on migrant children rights, and we are running campaign Cross-Border Childhood UA. If you are interested in this issue, we can maybe after event show more of this work to somebody particularly interested. And thank you very much. Thank you for speakers once again. And here on the panel, we have a voice from Ukraine, voice from Central Asia, voice from Caucasus, and voice from Siberia and Far East. The Siberian voice will be online. And I think it's great that there is this diversity of voices. And the first speaker is from Ukraine, Vira.
Thank you. So I am Ukrainian, as we heard, and my story can show you how practicing your civil rights on a daily basis can not only keep you free, but also can form your strengths and as a people, as a subject of state. As Ukrainian, I started to exercise my civil rights in the times when Russia, and its political desires, was a big factor for Ukraine. And it started long before my time. It started like centuries ago, but still it was there when I was young and I was, like accepting what the adult life is. And so today, this story is my personal story, my personal experience of how Ukrainian people opposed the Russian colonial oppression and how we deal and still dealing with that. So I am like a lot of citizens in my country for a long time, maybe for 20 years. We didn't 100% understood what's happening. We were young democracy, like Lithuania. It was 1991 when we became like independent. Yeah, and for a lot of people, it was just how people lived. The propaganda feeding you something, and you you think it's normal to live things how it was before. So when it was like really challenging to stay with the thing how it was before, and when I felt when I was young and trying to exercise my rights for something, for freedom, for speech, for like some public opinions, we started, me and my friends understood that we have to fight for it, that it's not so easy just to have it. You have to really, not ask, but fight for it. And my way to self-identificate like Ukrainian, it was like in stages. First of all, when I was 16, we got in Ukraine first revolution. It was 2004, and pro-Ukrainian candidate for presidency, he and his supporters were like opposing pro-Russian candidate, and it was big Maidan, and we have this square in Kiev. And I was, I was in school, so I wasn't there, but I knew that I feel something, and other people think that they have to protect the old way of things being in the country, in the state, in the city, yeah. And after that, I had maybe like 10 years of experience with my youth work, with civil rights movement, when we fight for, for opportunity to go to the square and have our posters with some request for the local authorities or for the government. Yeah, it wasn't so easy. Like I know by memory the the laws that states that in Ukraine you have the right to do that. Yeah, and we had a lot of years of work to gain this power to be just citizens, to have our rights, to exercise them. Nowadays, youth maybe don't know that in Ukraine you didn't have actually these rights before even they were wrote in some documents and in constitution. So when the next revolution came, I was very... I did know that Yanukovych, pro-Russian president, is bad for Ukraine. We all, who were 20-something, we all understood that this is a threat for democracy. This is not something that we can still be with, And we knew that there will be a fight. We didn't know the price of this fight, Definitely no one knows what will be after. But when it was the revolution, Euromaidan, Revolution of Dignity 2013, we all who were, the first line of response to this civil injustice, we all came to the squares of Ukraine, to the big cities. In every city, we had this Maidan and action. And a lot of people maybe for first time were doing some things, but for me, it wasn't first time. I was for years before, I was trying first time to speak Ukrainian publicly in not Ukrainian speaking cities like Odessa or Donetsk. I was starting to ask for something that no one around me asked before. No one was the people didn't care if you can go to the main square of your city and ask from officials for something. They were like, we're okay. But somebody weren't okay. And when the revolution, the main revolution, I would think now started, it was a lot of people on the main squares. It was a lot of consolidation between us. It wasn't 20 years before. And when I was scared, it's when people started to die. When on social peaceful protest, we got death of the peaceful people. They weren't the purpose of them being there weren't something violent. We didn't expect that the pro-Russian power in Ukraine will do such things. And still, after that revolution were a success, yeah, and we had like the change of power, and you can say that all that were not like all these choices wasn't bad, yeah, but still we have what we have now. And my last like stage of self-identification as Ukrainian, as you can guess, was in 2022, when it became like so obvious, like 1,000% obvious that I'm Ukrainian and they're like trying to kill me, yeah, like literally kill me. Me, my country, my land, my way of dealing with things in my home. So I think what's important for me to say that we didn't use, like it's nowadays agenda when we use this word imperialism and when we define all the things that are imperialism in the, like daily basis life, what we can experience from, for example, Russia and pro-Russian agenda, yeah. But then we just, like in 2013, we started to understand this Russian politics in Ukraine. It's really strong and it's really gathering their results, yeah. And we have to find maybe more. And it felt like these 10 years after 2013, like we gained a lot of changes in Ukraine. We had our, like democratic change. We now felt like we still the war was going on. Yeah, Crimea was occupied. The war in Donbas region still was going on for 9 years. Yeah, but we thought that we like make it a lot of steps forward the democratic state of Ukraine. But now I understand that really when you have such thing as Russian imperialism, you have to fight, like now it's literally to the death, yeah, but in my perspective to the life. If I would look back to life that I had, that my friends had, that all the people who were not so, who were involved in this civil movements in Ukraine, we all did right things, but just we all, and maybe more of Ukrainians, we just needed to do more, that the fight that is real, the fight with guns, yeah, wouldn't start. So what I want to say, maybe like my points in this speech, is the first, you have never stopped exercising your given in democratic rights, because when you stop, the bad guys start to work more. Yeah, it's not your success. Second is prepare for the fight, prepare to fight for what is yours. Your country, your people, your land, it's not a joke. And so defense mechanism and all the things you're doing have to be strong and real. As citizens, you always have to be responsible for your country and for your independence. All citizens for all things you have in your country. And third is to not wait for violence in order to act, to prevent and take actions when you can be heard and be seen. Do not wait for, like when you're hostage and you cannot do something. This is my wisdom, what I gained from my Ukrainian experience. Thank you.
So our next speaker will speak about the experience of Central Asian peoples, and that's Katerina Nazarshoeva.
Здравствуйте, я буду говорить на русском, выступать.
Hello, I'm going to address you in Russian. Thank you for this opportunity. And my presentation is on opposing colonial oppression of Russia in Central Asia, because I know this in reality, and I've given an opportunity to be the voice of Central Asia. I'm given this honor. We are multicultural region. We have a very sophisticated identity. I have blood from Pamir, from Uzbekistan, Moldova, and many other countries. And this is a typical situation for our region. All of these nations were under colonial oppression. And in the Soviet times, this oppression continued. It was following the legacy of the Russian Empire, and then it continued in the Russian Federation. And my family story and my personal story reflect that. And this happens 30 years after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Throughout all my life, I faced unfairness. I was perceived as a migrant in Russia, as Pamir in Uzbekistan, and when the full-scale war started in Ukraine, I also felt that in the Soviet times, they declared an internationalism and the friendship of nations, but in fact they suppressed the national identity of regions and the peoples of Central Asia. Therefore, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there were so many ethnic conflicts and pogroms. In my childhood, I was suppressed, and all of my indigenous roots were erased. They were different, but Pamir, Uzbek, Moldovan, Ukraine, Tajik blood was raised in me. Everything related to me, to my traditions and religion in Central Asia, were considered as extremism. And this policy continued in Central Asia towards minorities. The countries of Central Asia still strongly depend on the Russian Federation. In former times, Russian Empire was exploiting natural resources and cheap labor of local population at mines. They were excavating salt, building railroads and military structures. In our times, in the 21st century, we can see millions of people migrating from Central Asia to Russia. I felt it myself. Biased attitude, constant suppression of dignity, difficult labor conditions, non-safe labor conditions, a rough attitude of the local population of Russia and of the authorities of the Russian Federation, exploitation of people from Central Asia. This concerns people who live in migration, who live in unsafe conditions, who work in unsafe conditions. People die at work because of injuries. Migration rules in Russia are impossible to be met. Therefore, many Central Asian workers are the victims of police purges. They are constantly pursued by police who want them to pay bribes. There's a lot of corruption in migration bodies. The people get into blacklists for migrants. This is the pain that exists in Russia. And there's a huge problem of racism in Russia, both in households and among authorities, and people feel it everywhere, as well as migrants in Central Asia. In my case, it was not about the way I look and not the expression of my face, because I look like a Slav, but it was about my citizenship. When I said that I'm a citizen from Tajikistan, from Central Asia, they didn't care about my Russian literacy or university education. So I was not able to make a good impression because I spoke a perfect Russian, but because I had the stigma of my citizenship in Russia. And they didn't care about my experience, background. If I'm a migrant, if I'm from Tajikistan, then they cannot trust me. Now, as the war goes on in Ukraine, migrants pay a horrible price in Russia, and our region strongly depends on Russia. Many of the people who, to avoid corruption, checks and detentions, decided to get Russian citizenship, and now this brings them into the war because they are enlisted into the army to fight in Ukraine against Ukraine. They are cheated to conclude contracts with the army. They are engaged into operations in Ukraine and in different works, and therefore they are engaged in these military crimes. They do not die at construction sites like it happened before, but at a criminal war. And they didn't. This is the legacy of the Russian Empire. During the First World War, Russian Tsar mobilized the 400,000 people of non-Russian citizens of Central Asia and Central Asia. And there was a riot, and the riot was suppressed by Kazakhs and the army. Saving themselves from the riots, they rushed to Western China. The story continues today. However, this is in the framework of the war in Ukraine, and we can see suppression of non-Russian population. As the war broke, my Ukrainian identity emerged, and I could see all this parallelism, and I could see how this affected me. And this is a symbol of protest. I decided to make a tattoo, so this shows that the spirit of freedom emerged in me, that I analyzed the entire situation. I could see two wars, a civil war in Tajikistan and now the war in Ukraine. I didn't want to have this life, and I didn't want my children to live this life, but we are on the road again. We hit the road again. I'm sorry.
Shall we ask Shamil Magomadov to continue?
Pronounce the names in
Shamil Magomadov.
Здравствуйте, меня зовут Шамиль Магомедов.
Hello, my name is Shamil Magomadov. I'm from Dagestan. Honestly, it's hard to speak on behalf of the entire republic. It's a large responsibility because there are many views about policies of Russia from Dagestani people and not only. So I will cover the diversity of opinions present in Dagestani society on the imperial policies of Russia. The attitude to imperial policy of Russia is very diverse in Dagestan. It depends on the social status, on citizens' religion or ethnicity, and many factors. The period of the imperial policies of Russia can be named 1859, when Emil Shamil was imprisoned. The person leading the Caucasian opposition to Russia, who later surrendered, and Russia guaranteed the Republic of Caucasus, Dagestan and Chechnya the freedom of religion, that Russia would not infringe on their rights. And for a long time they respected this agreement until up to 90s. And since 80s or 90s, the discrimination in Russia became very obvious. What we heard from the previous speaker is also applicable to Caucasians in mass. The discrimination of not only Dagestani people, it applies to many other Caucasian nations, became massive. And this discrimination frequently includes the fact that citizens of Caucasus are not allowed to rent flats. This is what people announce in their announcements, that it's only for Slavs, or they're not given good jobs. Even in the army, when I was serving in border troops, FSB agent wanted people for the elite troops to safeguard presidential facilities, and he said only Slavs are allowed. And when I asked why only Slavs, he was a bit confused because it was not legal, and he said that this is the edict from his leadership. And there are many such cases. I think every Caucasian person has encountered such situations. One more factor which strongly annoys the Caucasian society is that state media, federal media, they highlight the crimes committed by Caucasian people from southern regions. They always focus on their ethnicity. It should also be added, I'm a former lawyer, I spent 14 years in the bar, also including close cooperation with Memorial, that Caucasians in central regions of Russia usually get longer prison terms than Slavic population for the same crimes, with the same aggravating or mitigating circumstances. Also, when imprisoned, in prisons, Caucasians frequently are discriminated by prison guards and administrations only because of their ethnicity and religion. A major factor which made Dagestani people doubtful about being an equal actor in Russia was the fact that in 2010 Russia gave 2 Dagestani villages to Azerbaijan. These were 2 enclaves, Kharakh Oba and Uryan Oba villages. After the collapse of USSR in 1991, these villages found themselves surrounded by Azerbaijani territory, but they always belonged to Dagestan. And in September 2010, the agreement was signed on the state border between Azerbaijan and Russia, and these villages were included as a part of Azerbaijan. And this agreement was signed by former President Medvedev and Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan. And the Dagestani people were not asked about it. State media, no one spoke about this on state media. Not only villages, but also pastories, and a large part of Samur River was transferred, which nourishes many fields in southern regions of Dagestan. A large part of this river belonged to the southern part of Dagestan. I will quote Aver Kisleyev from the Research Institute on the transfer of these villages. When the president of Dagestan was Mahu Aliyev, he blocked this agreement. During the negotiations in Baku, during the meeting, he strongly opposed transferring some part of Dagestan territory to Azerbaijan, and he even had the conflict with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, but the fact was that the talks were frozen, and they waited until Mukhaliyev left the position of the head, and many political scientists believe that the fact that he left his position early was due to the clash with the authorities about the transfer of these territories. And when the new head was appointed, Magomadov, during his rule, this agreement was signed in 2010, and the demarcation of border was signed actually behind the scenes, and Dagestani had to confront the consequences, and it caused major concerns, especially in the south of the republic. It's not only about the land, it's also about water resources and Samur River. The water in southern Dagestan is more expensive than gold. According to water use norms, Azerbaijan had to pay to Dagestan huge money, but it had never paid it, it will never will, and there was no clear explanation why they needed this demarcation from Russian officials. It's not clear how Russia motivated this deal. After the agreement on demarcation of border, Azerbaijan increased the payment for the rent of a Russian station, 7 up to 300 million. This was insult for Russia, and it had to drop the rent later. Maybe our politicians, quoting the same political science, later will give some arguments in favor of the deal, but people will not listen to them when they face the problem of shortage of water and pastures, and this would cause major problems at the border of Azerbaijan. Also, in Dagestani society, there is an opinion that the corruption, which according to the formal statistics is one of the highest in Dagestan among other regions of Russia, is determined. This is actually a tool used by the federal center to make sure that Dagestan, to stop the economic development of Dagestan. The thesis that Dagestan lives on subsidies from the capital city is very actively promoted by the federal government, and many people of Dagestan don't believe in it because the republic has very good economic potential to be sustainable, to sustain itself, and it could also live as an independent state and it could feed itself. And this corruption factor in Caucasus and the imitation of fight on corruption by the federal center, this is the imitation of fight against corruption in Dagestan. It's obvious to the entire population about 10 years ago, when there were so many arrests in the republic, arresting mayors, ministers. But the arrested officials, are replaced by the people who don't have any good reputation, and they have been participating in some corruptional schemes before. The problem of pressure against the religious communities of Dagestan is a large problem. About 90% of people in Dagestan are Muslim. For 7 or 8 years in Dagestan, and by the way, it's quite unique for Dagestan, the federal center has introduced the so-called preventional registration of people inclined to extremism and terrorism. But in reality, these lists include random people, not only those who are actually prone to extremism, but any people, even people who don't confess any religions. Our Human Rights Center was approached by many people who found themselves on this list, and this is a semi-open list. There is no open list anywhere, and the authorities deny that this list exists. But everyone knows that such lists exist. People are stopped at checkpoints, they are interrogated, they are questioned, kept for hours, their homes are visited, fingerprinted, photographed, taking samples of saliva and voice, so it creates problem for them in day-to-day life. One Buddhist approached us, and atheists who were also registered. The officers of the Minister of Interior aim at identifying as many as possible persons inclined to extremism. As they fail to identify many people, they just try to fulfill the plan, and they register random people, creating many problems for them. According to some estimations, it's not possible to have accurate calculations because the list is closed, but now there is about 20 to 25,000 persons in Dagestan included in this list. Out of them, the majority are the people having nothing to do with any extremism or terrorism. So it's enough that some people came by a mosque, and during a raid, police officers can grab anyone, even those who are not in a mosque, and everyone is brought to the police office and they are registered. On the background of all these issues, with every day, the opinion is becoming more popular in Dagestan. The Dagestan should become an independent state. The only factor against it is the experience of Chechnya. If you remember, there were 2 wars in Chechnya, and as you know, the Chechen war was not only for territorial independence, but it was also along the religious lines. And many Dagestani people know the situation firsthand, and they are very afraid that if Dagestan attempts at sovereignty, everyone understands that it's a mystical idea. They understand that it's unrealistic, but still some people have this dream. But still they understand that Dagestan can turn into another Chechnya with radical religious groups grabbing the power, and this is what might happen. And this factor is a serious concern for many Dagestani. So no matter how much they disagree with the federal center, and although many Dagestani people hate Russia as a metropoly, the issue of sovereignty is frozen, and people don't know how to go about this idea and how to avoid the Chechen scenario. This is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shamil. Indeed, Caucasus is a very important area, and this is very tragic. Many people have not realized the discrimination, oppression. They had not realized it before. You have been describing the events in the north and in the south of the Caucasus. Thank you for dwelling on this.
Sheva, brave activist from Western Siberia, activist of indigenous people's rights and environmental activist.
Меня слышно? Здравствуйте. Спасибо большое за приглашение.
I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much for inviting me. I welcome all of you. In fact, this has been very interesting to listen to all of you. And this echoed in me, I mean, the stories of all the presenters. It's not easy to dwell on our stories, and I'm going to dwell on my own story. And I would like to tell you about the situation in general, about the indigenous peoples of Russia. I'm from the Shor indigenous people from Russia. I'm from the Pamirs Oblast, from Donbass, which is the coal area. 5 years ago, I was forced to flee from Russia because my family and I were fighting with the barbaric excavation of coal in Kuzbass, and unfortunately Russian authorities, large coal corporations, threatened and harassed us. And right now I'm in the north of Sweden. We got our asylum here. I'd like to say the following. Indigenous peoples of Russia, there are various ones. I'm from a small indigenous people, and there are larger ones. Those who are not Russians in Russia have always been suffering in Russia. My people, who have been fishing, hunting for centuries, and who used to do smith work before, we lost this type of our traditional handcrafting as smith working because the Russians are prohibited, banned this to our people. And today we are losing because of the barbaric excavation of coal, since our taiga is being destroyed and our rivers are polluted by barbaric excavation of coal because they have open excavation of coal. Today we are losing such traditional crafts as fishing, hunting, and naturally many of my people relocate to urban areas. They lose their native language, they assimilate, they undergo urbanization, and naturally our health really suffers. Our children get born with horrible diseases. There's a very high rate of cancer. This is because of the environmental disaster in our region. This is one of the chains in the link of the colonial policy of Russia. In general, as I've said, indigenous peoples of Russia have been suffering, and we can see this today. We could see this when a large-scale invasion of the Russian troops started in Ukraine. A year ago, mobilization started, and we could eyewitness this. Who were the first people to be enlisted in the army? Who were sent to the front? The representatives of indigenous people, Yakuts, Buryat, Tuva. All of these peoples are sent to the war in Ukraine. Some of the representatives of indigenous people do that voluntarily because they are subjected to propaganda. Propaganda continues and people volunteer. Many of them go there just to make their living. They die and then their bodies are brought home. Many people could not simply hide. They didn't know what to do. They don't know what to do, and then they are grabbed and enlisted. There were cases when people, activists in Yukagir, reported that in Yakutia, in faraway villages, there were helicopters flying in because there are no roads, so they would fly in to enlist people from there. It's horrible, and it's a tragedy for our peoples. My people is 10,000 people, and if they enlist 10 or 20 of them, and the Shor people, have some of our people who are prisoners of war. Many of them get back from the war being wounded, and they have disabilities now. However, there are people who volunteer to be in the war, and this is scary. Many people give up to the opposing army. Some people who are in prisons conclude contracts to come back to their homeland as alleged heroes, and some of our men would go hunting, and they would do berry picking, traditional crafts where their ways to make their living. And some of those people simply arrived to Alaska by boat, and they asked for an asylum there. So we had cases like that. In general, the situation is horrible, scary, and very sad. It's important to highlight it, and it's important that we're here today to discuss it. And the agenda of colonial oppression is very acute. We have been speaking about that for a long time. This situation in our region, this situation with coal excavation, has been going on for quite a while, and naturally indigenous peoples, not only in Russia but around the world, usually live in those areas that have lots of deposits, and there is a conflict between the peoples and businesses. We have a right to our area, and there should be our informed preliminary consent. However, Russia does not recognize the rights of indigenous peoples. Russia tries to manipulate indigenous peoples. When those people who have lots of money and leverage what do? They simply buy the representatives, some organizations among indigenous people, and then they present this fake culture, and then they present us as funny people who dance and sing. However, they do nothing for our native language. They do nothing to really develop us, and they do not support the right for our self-determination. I was really short in my description because I tried to present it all in a brief way, but in the end I would like to say that, in fact, and I would like to reiterate the idea that has been mentioned today, that Ukraine today pays a very high price. This is a tragedy. We can see they pay this price for freedom, not only for their own freedom, but for the freedom of all other nations and people who have been suffering from discrimination for centuries. They have been suffering from suppression and xenophobia. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Спасибо огромное, Yanna, за это яркое выступление.
Many thanks, Yanna, for this outstanding presentation. And now the last speaker is also a representative of an indigenous person from Kamchatka, Dmitry Bereshkov, the expert on the rights of indigenous people.
Thank you to Anti-Discrimination Centre Memorial for initiating this important event. My name is Dmitry Bereshkov. I'm a representative of Itelmen people from Kamchatka. It's a Russian forest, a big peninsula in Russian forest. And I could say we have a rather similar situation with what Yanna described, but you can change or call to fish. Kamchatka is one of the richest region in the world by fish and water bioresources, and we also have big problems with commercial companies who extract fish resources. Sometimes we have even a situation when a commercial company receive license and ground for fishing inside the village or near the village where indigenous peoples live, and they can fish there, but it is prohibited for the local population to fish there, and where they fish for centuries. And of course, it's kind of one of example of discrimination. I also a member of the International Committee of Indigenous Peoples of Russia. It's a rather new organization, young organization, which we created in the March 2022 as our reaction to the start of the war in Ukraine. Because I personally had to escape from Russia for political reasons under the pressure of the Russian security service FSB in 2011. And we have other activists like Yanna and other people in different countries. So we realized that we need to unite our efforts to express our disagreement with this war, to show to the world that the indigenous peoples of Russia do not support this war. And it was and it is continued to be very dangerous for our indigenous peoples, our colleagues and sisters and brothers who continue to live in Russia to express themselves because of the fear of repression. At the same time, I think it's very important to underline who are indigenous peoples in Russia. Russia in the beginning of 90s recognized so-called small number of indigenous peoples, and it's a rather unique terminology. It's not used in other parts of the world, and these is peoples who continue to their traditional style of life, like reindeer herding, hunting, fishing. At the same time, according to Russian legislation, they has to be less than 50,000, from one perspective, it's a very restrictive and discriminating situation for other peoples in Russia, like Yakut, for example, people who are bigger than this number. At the same time, we have to recognize that our people are one of the most vulnerable. Some of our nations are less than 2,000, less than several thousand, or even hundreds of persons. And we are more or less 2/3 of our peoples are involved in traditional economy, continue to their traditional economy, and preserve their traditional style of life, and depends economically on these economies like fishing, reindeer herding, and other things. And indigenous peoples continue to be one of the poorest part of the general population of Russia. Such events are very important to us because we are lack of resources. We are lack of intellectual resources, of human resources, financial resources, and our voice is not visible on international level and national level because bigger players, bigger forces do not consider it's important to hear some voices who is so small in number. Also, I want to underline the very important point from us, what is colonization, what is not colonization, and how it's considered by Russian officials and Russian historians. You know this discourse that Russian historians and official representative of the state, they do not recognize that Russia is a colony empire. They said with Russia, do not colonize territories. They join territories, voluntarily join, unification, brotherhood, and love forever. At the same time, we understand that Russia is a pure example of the classical colonial empire. Its tradition, which is go from Moscow state to Russian Empire, then Soviet Union, continue right now. And the only difference, maybe potential difference, one of the difference, because they said that we are different from, for example, Britain colonialism, colonial empire, or Spanish. It's economical nature. For example, if Spanish came to Americas and they hunt for gold and they kill everybody who possessed the gold to grab this gold, Russian Cossacks who came to Siberia, they need furs, and for furs they need hunters, and that's why they do not kill too many of our indigenous peoples, because they had to receive yasak. It's taxes. At the same time, this economical nature of negotiations with our nations, with our indigenous peoples, continue through the Soviet Union history, when just economical dimension change. The first changed by oil and gas, and they start to extract natural resources in Siberia, in Yamal, and now we only see that it's again shifting technology from oil and gas and these kind of classic energy sources to new minerals, lithium, nickel, and other metals which need for the shift of the world to the new green economy. It's like waves of economical exploitation of the territories, and that's why that's how the Russian state believe and work, and especially it's important for Moscow, because the trade of extraction of natural resources is one of the biggest income for the Russian budget. And actually, if you look at the country, our peoples, we have only 40 small number of indigenous peoples of Siberia are Russian Arctic and Far East, and the general population is about 250,000 people. And for example, my nation, Itelmen nation, we only about 2,500 persons, but we live in a huge territories from Finland to Chukotka and to China. It's about 2/3 of the Russian territory, general territory, because many of our peoples continue to be nomad. They use a huge distances, for example, for reindeer herding and other things. Why these such meetings is very important for us, and we need support and help. I can give you an example. Already Yanna mentioned that Russia tried to use, and they use indigenous movement, indigenous peoples as an instrument of colonizing themselves. And we have Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, and I worked for this organization for many years before I had to leave Russia. And this, before it was a human rights organization, classical one, which protect indigenous rights, promote human rights agenda, but now it became an instrument of Kremlin propaganda. This year, the UN body, the expert mechanism of the rights of indigenous peoples, prepared a report of influence of militarization on indigenous peoples around the world. And they include there several points about Russia. And when we read these these words, we even can imagine that they were written in Kremlin directly. For example, when they speak about the draft campaign and forced mobilizations among indigenous peoples, they said that the indigenous peoples in Russia have the right for alternative military service. And for example, that means that if during the drafting campaign, they can refuse to go to the war. But I have two friends in Yakutia who exactly were drafted for military service, for mobilized forcefully, because they were hunters. They speak in not only in Russian but Yakut language, and also they have jobless. And, you know, they have no official job because they continue to their traditional style of life. And if you consider the percentage of how many indigenous peoples, of course, huge numbers of percentage of drafting of indigenous peoples. But the challenge for us is that Russia, through their engines, through their influence, and they have engines exactly in the UN system, and through their negotiations with other countries of the global south, they influence and they leave the legal traces in the UN documentation. And this is a report. We protested. We said that it's not true. It's lie. It's completely not reflect the real picture. But finally, it was approved by the UN. It's official document. And we asked the support of the expert community, of the international community, to fight against lie in the international officially recognized documents. The another issue which such events important for us, it's also about colonization, colonial things. Now you see, I don't like this terminology, the window of opportunity, totally, but a lot of discussion now going on, not only in ethnic minorities, in nationality and different nations level, but also, for example, in Russian political opposition, discussion about what happened in future. And we all agree that this war, the start of the war in Ukraine, it's a kind of final step. We don't like it have to be the same in the future. The situation must be changed. It's different discussion about how it happened, but different sides, different stakeholders discuss about the future. Will Russia disintegrate? Will be separate states? Will not? Is it possible or not? And for example, we see that there are different points of view. One among democratic opposition, so-called democratic opposition, and they discuss that will be any disintegration, no any separation. It's not a potential possible future. And they of course express their opinion, based opinion, their arguments, but in some arguments we with horror hear the same argumentation that Kremlin used in their colonial discussion. For example, they think that we need to recognize that Russia came to the Siberia land, to the Arctic land, and they were almost empty. There were no people. For example, they have an argument that Russia, it's difficult to say that Russia is now continue their Russification, because in many national ethnic republic they have a leadership, I mean regional administration, which a lot of consists of nationalities. For example, Yakutian from Yakutsk, Yakutia Republic from Yakutian, Tatar from Tatars, and they consider it's a sign of participation of these nationalities in the government, but it is not. It's an instrument of continuing of colonial empire policy. And the biggest disappointment for us that they initiate this discussion without even consultation, without even asking the people who live in this region, who represent these people, who are these who are members of these national communities. They said they said that the idea of independent Bashkortostan is interesting only a few marginal persons inside Bashkortostan. That's why we don't need to discuss about that. And we consider it's a very disappointed point of view and continuation of imperial paradigm, because empire, it's not only land, economy, or policy, it's also your mindset, your brain, what you're thinking about. The other point of view, completely different, is the point of view of ethnic activists, who said, we want to organize our own separate state. We have to finish this imperial political, we want independence. Of course, it's also, we support this point of view. We support self-determination up to create your own states. But we as ethnic minorities, we cannot create we understand that we cannot create future states ourselves because of we have no people. We anyway will find out ourselves in somebody else's state, will be it Russia or Yakutia or other country, and we are very worried about the discussion. They said the main purpose of us is to create independent state, and we don't want too much discuss how there will be an organized governance system, what the style of democracy there will be. And we have experience of Soviet Union, which separated on Central Asian state and Baltic states. It's a completely different situation. And I'm not sure that indigenous peoples, we as indigenous peoples, will be too much very interesting to find out ourselves in Central Asian state where authoritarian regime continue to be. And that's why such discussions, it's important for us. And we ask now the different stakeholders that we need to start to discuss what will be the future of indigenous peoples, also a small number of indigenous peoples in your future agenda, in the future policy. Unfortunately, we understand that big stakeholders, they do not interested to discuss with small stakeholders such issues. That's why we ask support of Western political powers, of Western intellectual powers to be a mediator, to invite different sides to the table and discuss these important for us questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I am really impressed on the idea when you approached me to organize this event, and I understand even more after your witnesses you gave us that we need to go forward and follow-up must happen as well. So now it's time short. Unfortunately, we didn't want to interrupt you because it's so important for you to express yourself. But we have now very little time for Q&A session. But we still have some time, and I will open this for Q&A session. if someone would like to intervene and ask questions. First of all, I would like to give you the floor, but you will introduce yourself.
It's a very interesting conference. We don't know in Europe too much about the... my name is Stella Veliki. I have studied physics and informatics. I am a member of the European Physics Society. And we don't know in Europe about even the name of your country. It's very difficult for us to know where it is. If you ask me, I don't know. It's very good to come here and to speak about it, because so we know more. But my question is, Russia, Putin, for me, it's a new fascist dictator from Putin. That it's Putin. Lies from Putin is his political view. He lies like he breathes, clearly. So nobody believes what he said now. The problem is, if he loses, he is involved in a war, in two wars, one directly in Ukraine and indirectly in Middle East. Now he supports Hamas, he supports Iran, and there's no way between Israel and Hamas. Hamas has no possibility to win, and Hezbollah not at all. And Putin, if he loses these two wars in Ukraine and in Middle East, can help you. How is the influence in your opposition in your country? Can help you to have a bigger opposition and to become independent, to do what you want. And the second question is, I'm coming very often here in European Parliament. I never heard somebody or some seminar condemning Russia that he don't respect the human rights. Never. Not in prison, not the political prison, not in the other countries, not the minority. Never heard. Why? Why? That is my question. Why is nobody speak about it?
I just want to add, we will select more questions in one round, but now I just wanted not to leave this, because in the Parliament, European Parliament, is many resolutions condemning, not only since last year, but many years ago with Putin. So here we are condemning in very strong words, even special resolutions on not only criminal court, which is already started to do their job, but also about the special tribunal for Putin. And the parliament is united, more than I expected, by the way, from left to our groups in the right, but except those extremes, maybe sometimes from extreme left and extreme right. So I just wanted to correct you and to say, and thank you. Your first part of your intervention is really what we are discussing about here, about the future of Russia. We have Russian opposition representatives here. They also know that we had special, Kubilius left already, member of European Parliament in June. We had here special platform established already for Russian opposition. And I think that people from the other nations in Russian Federation also can join the same platform, as I understand that, at least my opinion. So maybe more questions and more interventions, and then you will fix, and somebody will, maybe not all of you, because we will not have time, but you will select maybe some minute by minute, each by each. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Alexander Vigbov, sociologist working in France and in Germany. Thank you very much for your talk, which is quite comprehensive. I have a question which concerns the role of mediation of the European intellectual and political powers, as you mentioned. Do you already collaborate with the platform of the Russian opposition here? Do people who you were talking critically about represent Russia in this framework? And if not, do you have still cooperation and maybe collaboration with some groups and networks which remain in Russia, which quit Russia, but who still, being the opposition, support your vindications? Thank you.
Julia will read some question or intervention from online our followers.
Yes, so we have one question currently on the chat. The question comes from Anastasia Benidze, who presents herself as an oppositionist from Russia. And the question is quite long, so anyone who's connected online, feel free to read it on the chat. I will just summarize it briefly. Essentially, the intervention suggests that she would like to ask about Georgia. She considers that Georgia is no longer a safe country. The government is very much pro-Russian and pro-Putin, and the influence of Russia is increasing in Georgia. The borders are continuously moving, and the security situation is getting worse. In this context, I will quote just the question. The question is how we could reconsider the security of Georgia and influence the pro-Putin government in Georgia has, and in whose hands Georgia is as a gift for Putin. So this is the question.
Okay. Who else? Do we have some? One more?
I actually have a question on my behalf. I'm Yulia Ravaitytė, the assistant of Rasa. I would like to ask about the situation in Russia specifically. So this is mostly for the speakers representing Russian minority groups. What we heard from Vira actually is a story of how her identity has finally reached, I would say, a maturity, the identity of a Ukrainian that is not an identity of a Russian as a result of war. And we see this kind of tendency, not only in Ukraine, I think, but also in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, in many countries in the region. People are reasserting their own identity as not Russian, not colonial, and then this decolonial movement seems to be really on the rise around Russia. So I would like to ask, how does that look like in Russia? Because as we hear, violence against minorities, violence that is similar in many ways to what Ukrainians are experiencing, so people being sent to war, is really targeting minorities. Do we see this kind of identity being formed within Russia, a strengthening of a unique non-Russian decolonial identity among minority groups, or is that not a thing because of, I don't know, information, propaganda, fear, and many other aspects? So if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I also would like to add the question, especially to those representatives of those small nations or nations, they are far from us, about the possibility to reach your people, to speak with them, because we know what kind of propaganda is too soft to say. It's like a weapons of mass brain or mindset destruction for the people. They are doing what they are providing today. It's nothing to compare with Soviet times. When I was born in Soviet Union, occupied Lithuania, and that was nobody trusted on this, what Brezhnev period time they were producing, you know. But now, how can you reach people there, and how can you feel the situation and opinions? Because I am not sure if majority shares the same understanding as you were expressing here today.
And if I may, there is one more question that I have to read in Russian. Zakiyeva Alexandra интересуется
Alexandra Zakiyeva, a biologist, she thanks you for your work, and she has a question to the representatives of indigenous people. What do you think about Russian identity in Russia after democratization, demilitarization of Russia? And do you believe yourselves to be Russians, and how this inclusive identity can be in future Russia? So I would like to answer this and maybe a couple of other questions, but we have to fit into 5 minutes. These are very sophisticated questions. I would merge this question with the first one, and the question from Alexander. I think these are related things about identity. On the one hand, they wonder do you think that you would perceive yourselves as Russians in the future? And on the other hand, as Julia said, do you consider that there is a growing feeling among the peoples of Russia, the feeling of their own self-determination, of their national ethnic identity? And I would ask you to answer this question, skeptic question about our position. Please answer this question or come to approach Alexander after the meeting and answer his question directly. And I would like to ask Shamil to answer briefly about Georgia, because there was a question by Anastasia Belinza. She believes that in the Caucasus, in Georgia, there's a slow deploying occupation. So, Dmitry?
First of all, about how we reach our nations and people and friends and colleagues in Russia, I will not give you the exact answer because it's threatened their security. But today's world, it's a world of internet and negotiations. And fortunately, we have opportunity to negotiate, but it became extremely difficult. Also because of security, because of closed border, difficult connections and pressure from the state. But we receive information from communities and we communicate. As about the question about the negotiations, mediations with Russian, we are not a part of platform. We will be very glad to participate in this work. This is completely new topic for us because before we were involved a lot into reindeer herding issues, in protecting rights on lands, on natural resources, but it's a usual indigenous people's agenda around the world, and we were part of it. And only now, when we start to understand that there is a decolonization discussion around here about future of Russia and what is happening now, and our voice not visible at all because we are a very small nation. That's why we start to also think about and to express ourselves. And for example, I can send you the article that we wrote about it not long ago. As about how we feel ourselves, we all the time, as indigenous peoples, we feel ourselves as indigenous peoples. It's more difficult with people who live in cities, but because, for example, my relatives, they need fish. They need fish it's their life. They need fish. That's why they anyway go for river. They fish there. Will be poachers, not poachers. They involved in the right fighting, etc. But we see now that this war born a lot of identity among bigger nations, so-called bigger nations, who do not interested in such questions like their culture, like their identity, like Tatar, Bashkir, Buryat. Maybe I don't want to feel to hurt somebody feels, but we see that this growth, that they understand ourselves, that we are separate nations. And we have our own culture and our own identity. And this is kind of growth of self-determination. We are happy about this. And the fourth question was about... about future Russian identity. I'm not sure that I'm an expert to answer this because it's a completely difficult issue. But I hope that in future nations, even if will be belong to different nations and experience different nation identity, they could communicate with each other without conflicts and without at least armed fighting.
So thank you very much, Dmitry. And we thought maybe to readdress the question about Georgia to present Georgian colleague, Simon Papuashvili.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, situation in Georgia is far from perfect. You know, Georgian people, I think, more this year woke up to realize that they don't live in an independent country anymore. The country is effectively ruled from Moscow by FSB. It's a puppet state. It's a puppet government, and so far they don't have much idea how to get rid of this. Unfortunately, whether Georgia can be considered safe for colleagues who come from other countries, including Russia, I don't think so. We already see signs when Georgian government doesn't even pretend to be acting independently and alone, and this has many different expressions. And I personally predict that the situation is only going to get worse in the coming months. Yeah. So what we tell to our partners also is that don't think that you're coming to a safe place. It is not a safe place. Anyone can be denied entry. Anyone can be detained and deported or extradited to the country of their origin, unfortunately.
Yes, but we have to finish, unfortunately. Maybe you will be able to speak with our speakers after the meeting, and you will, I think, get answers and maybe contacts to contact them in the future. So, yes, once again, I am really proud to have you here. And after this meeting, we will have your contacts, and you always are welcome to approach us, to send some information to my office. Julia Ravaitytė, before she came to work here, was involved into some non-governmental organizations related with the region, South Caucasus region, but not only. So we have this interest. Myself, I am also working as EPP, the largest political group in the parliament, vice chairman, vice president, responsible for external affairs. So it is also my not only interest as Lithuanian, but also as my duty to have contacts with you. And my final message, of course, is for the future. We have a lot of conferences here, including Future of Russia. You know that today Roberta Metsola announced her idea to include Ukrainians and parliamentarians from Moldova as possible in the future members of EU, to have here observer status in the future, maybe from the next term, which would be very important. And I think it's very good message for all nations in Russian Federation, including Russians themselves. Because what I feel, this war against Ukraine, which was started by Putin, of course, in 2014, but this large-scale war happened last year. You know, I remember very well this morning when I woke up with this message, and journalists started to call me for interventions, for comments. And my first message myself was that this is the beginning of Putin's end. And he is doing this because Ukrainians woke up not yesterday, but some years before. Everywhere around is like he had good relations here in the western part of Europe, and he lost everything. And of course, it's not possible that colonial imperialistic power will survive for a long time being in the future. And that will be a challenge for Russian nation as well. For Russian people, they are fighting today against Putin. And I think that themselves, Russian nation is also somehow occupied by this regime. And the Ukrainians are fighting for Russians as well, for their freedom, not for their own freedom. And not everybody share the same opinion, because many people are so angry, so angry on on what's happened. And they say in my country also that all Russians are responsible and all Russians have to pay the price what Putin did. Yes, I agree that they are somehow responsible, like Georgians, unfortunately, also those who elected and were, supporting Bidzina Ivanishvili for so long time. Of course, they are responsible for that. Nobody from outside came to occupy Georgia intentionally. So this is my answer for that. But we are trying to do our best, understanding this tragic situation in Russia, with Russian nation as well. So that's why my final call is, let's go together with those who are able to visit the exhibition in this building in this house on deportations from this time from Lithuania. And this would be, I think, our common, how to say, expression or understanding that history matters. It is not only because people without knowing their history, they are committing the same crimes or doing the same bad things they already were done before. And Russian, unfortunately, especially Russian people, even young people, they don't know their history. And this is tragic for all nations of Russian Federation. It was the same with many other nations as well. So thank you very much again. And let's keep in touch. And we will try to do more. And but of course, the first thing we must do is to help Ukraine to win this war. Without that, it will be no free Russia. It will be no free Russian nation. It will be no possibility for your nations also to survive even, and to have your families free and alive. Because genocide, which is committed now by Putin, with Putin regime taking into the war minorities, especially minorities from Siberia and other parts of the country, it's like a genocide. It's like a genocide to take people to the war, to kill them, because for Putin is not how to say, negaila. Of those people, he thinks that it will be better even. More will be killed in this war from small nations, less problems in the future. So this is my final sentence, and thank you very much, especially to your organization to initiating this event, and we will keep in touch.